Hi, everyone. Welcome to the SANE webinar today. We're really excited to share some information with you around World Bipolar Day. But first, we'd like to start with making an acknowledgement of country. In the spirit of reconciliation, SANE Australia acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea, and community. We pay our respect to their elders past, present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. I'm coming to you from Wurundjeri lands today. I'd also like to recognise lived experience. SANE respects and champions the individual and collective expertise of people with the lived experience of mental health issues and their families and communities and people impacted by suicide. We recognise their vital contribution at all levels and value the courage of those who share this unique perspective for the purpose of learning and growing together to achieve better outcomes for all. My name is Luke Marshall, and I'm the chair of SANE's Lived Experience Advisory Committee, as well as serving on the SANE board. And today is World Bipolar Day. And given we're sharing in the spirit of lived experience, I was diagnosed bipolar originally during university years. My recovery journey was a protracted one that took a couple of years to get back on my feet, and am now sort of in a fortunate position to be able to stay well and give back to the community. And some of that looks like the work we do with SANE. I'm joined by four other experts on screen, and you'll hear from them all in turn today. Just a bit of housekeeping though to start. Just checking the numbers. We had a very healthy number of RSVPs, so we're delighted that we sort of filled up our registrations. And so we do ask you to ask questions, but to do it through the communications channels as well. And we hope to have at least 10 minutes at the end to address these. So you can submit questions using the Q&A tab on the right of your screen through the Zoom webinar link. And with such a huge turnout, I suspect we won't be able to answer everyone's question, but we do have a special link on the SANE forums, which I really encourage you to join for people to continue the conversation and share any information and expertise in there as well. I need to note that this session is also being recorded and will be made available to all registrants following the session. So if you're watching the recorded version, welcome. And it will also be placed up on the Bipolar Resources page at www.sane.org. And before we make an official start, I'd also like to send our deepest gratitude to the Colindina 5 Foundation, who have generously sponsored this event today. So thank you for your help and assistance there. I'd like to now introduce Dr. Rahul Khanna. Rahul is an experienced psychiatrist, researcher, educator, and technologist who is currently the Chief Clinical Officer at SANE and the Director of Innovation and Medical Governance at Phoenix, Australia. Rahul is going to provide a brief clinical overview of bipolar disorder. Good to see you again, Rahul, and I'll hand it over to you now.
Thanks, Luke. Look, we wanted this focus to really be on the lived experience, sort of practical insights. So I'll be brief here. Look, bipolar disorder, as you can probably guess a little bit from the title, really refers to people experiencing the two or multiple poles or sort of extremes of experience in terms of their mood. So at the one end, it can be about depression, where you feel low and lose kind of interest in things that previously interested you, which many of us are quite familiar with. But at the other end, it can be a much more kind of elevated or irritable mood, so where you feel almost uncomfortably high, as some of the other speakers may speak of, and that can be linked often to really high levels of energy, talkativeness, sometimes risk-taking behavior, and really some challenges in just keeping a straight straight train of thought. It can also have sometimes for some people elements of psychosis, so losing a bit of touch with reality, picking up some strange beliefs, often in a kind of more elevated or hyper positive sense, feeling on top of the world, being able to do anything and everything all at the same time. Um, there's a few different types of bipolar. So for some people, they have that full hand of things that I described, what we call mania, those periods of being quite high and elevated, and others have a more gentle form that might be a bit less protracted or disrupt their life a bit less, called hypomania. Um, and so respectively, these kind of fall in the kind of clinical bucket of bipolar 1 or bipolar 2. There's a few other variations in terms of how frequently and how severe each of these poles are for people. And there's a bit of controversy about what we call that in the clinical space. Some people have then kind of called it type 3, type 4, type 5, type 6. There's other terms like cyclothymia. Things get a bit murkier as you get more and more kind of complex around these blurred lines. Um, some people also have what are called mixed states. So you get a bit of sort of these depressive sort of symptoms or challenges, as well as some of the highs that I described kind of at the same time. And all of these, there's a lot of kind of deep research and clinical experience around these things, probably beyond the scope of a quick webinar and tour, but those are the kind of the classic bits. I guess the key message when it comes to diagnosis, though, is that diagnosis is not destiny. It just people vary a whole heap in what their experience is like, both in between each other, but also for themselves in one period of life compared to another. So it's important not to read too much into how your last year or last few weeks have been, and project forwards. I've certainly worked with people who have had their second and only kind of episode in their 60s, and it took a lot of sleuthing to work out that way back in it when they were 18 they had their first other episode. So you kind of these things aren't fate and aren't clear cut. In terms of the treatment end and what we do clinically, there is certainly a role for medications for many, particularly at the start of illness. There's a really strong impact for and utility in therapy, in lifestyle changes. We know bipolar is linked quite strongly to circadian rhythms, so sleep-wake cycles and things like that. I guess the other slant on those sort of life cycles is acknowledging that sleep and wake is not the only cycle, and also that a range of things kind of feed into that. It could be your social rhythm, can be your meal times. That regularity seems to help a great deal in preventing relapses. On the treatment side, obviously I can't go into details specifically, but I guess a few things worth noting is firstly there are a lot of options, and increasingly a lot kind of in the pipeline as well. So it's important, if you've had a mixed experience with some things, it's worth revisiting the conversation with a psychiatrist around what those emerging options are. Sometimes the options can vary depending on your own pattern, in terms of do you tend to get more in the way of depressive episodes, more in the way of mania or hypomania, and the treatment might look a bit differently at each of those phases. And so if you haven't, again, if you've had a kind of ordinary run, sometimes it can be worth revisiting and seeing what else might be appropriate. And also feel free to kind of shop around in terms of the clinicians you work with as well. Sometimes, particularly when things may have been very difficult very quickly, you may have had fewer options for choice, but certainly as a particular kind of episode fades, that's a good time to kind of look into who best you connect with and explore what your options might be. Happy to answer other questions as they come up, but I don't want to soak up too much time. on the clinical matters, it's worth obviously connecting with a clinician around some of these aspects. Um, Back over to you, Luke.
Yeah. Thanks, thanks, Rahul. A great sort of background and introduction there. I'm now sort of delighted to hand over to hear some of the personal stories, and we'll start with Anita Link. Anita is a vet, writer, author, and mental health advocate. She lives in Brisbane with her husband, two teenage children, two Burmese cats, two budgies, and most importantly, a Stimson's python called Clarence. Anita is going to talk us through her lived experience of the diagnosis journey. So over to you, Anita, and thanks for coming here today.
Thanks, Luke. So thank you for having me today. I'll start by saying that everyone's path to a bipolar diagnosis is different. Having spoken to many people about theirs over the last nearly 20 years, I believe mine was fairly straightforward, but not that common. So a little bit about me and how my lived experience with this illness began. In early August 2006, I was 32 years old and about to give birth to my first baby. I'd been working as a small animal vet for 8 years. Some of that time was in Adelaide, some in the UK, and some in Brisbane, which was where Michael, my husband, and I were located at the time and still are. Aside from some work-related burnout, which resolved when I had some time off and changed jobs, I had no history of mental illness. My daughter was born healthy and by cesarean after I went into a 33-hour labour on 2 hours sleep. Now, I was familiar with the sleep deprivation of after-hours veterinary work, and I wasn't too concerned at first. But that changed. I should have been exhausted. I should have been able to sleep when I had the opportunity, but I didn't. So in the 5 days that I spent in the maternity hospital, I slept maybe an hour a night. And on the morning of my discharge, I was curled into a sobbing ball on the floor while my husband held our baby and rang the buzzer for help. The midwife's name who came in was Charlotte, and I remember this because she may have saved mine and my baby's life that day. She listened to me tell her that I felt something was very wrong. She didn't dismiss me. She said, "I think there's more going on with you than the baby blues, and I will talk to the obstetrician about referring you straight to a mother baby unit rather than going home today." I was relieved because I was not expected to go home unsupported with my baby, and I was fearful because this was not how I'd envisaged my homecoming day. The obstetrician agreed with Charlotte's assessment of more than the baby blues and referred me to the Brisbane Centre for Postnatal Disorders, which is a mother-baby unit in a private psychiatric hospital in Brisbane. Now, stigma and self-stigma, I think, often exist without us being aware of it, because at that time, I would not have considered myself someone who stigmatised mental illness. And yet, once I realised I was about to be admitted to a psychiatric hospital, I wanted to leave. I was finally talked into staying, and I thought, I'll just stay for a night or two and catch up on sleep. I didn't sleep for the following 2 nights, even with my baby in the nursery overnight, even with medication to help me sleep. By the 3rd day, sound was sharper, light was brighter, systems organised themselves in my brain like armies, and I had the answers to every puzzle in the universe. My speech was rapid. I jumped from one topic to the next. I laughed inappropriately or for no reason at all. Michael didn't know what to make of it. By the 3rd night, he was alarmed enough to ask one of the nurses about this strange behaviour. By then, my experience had shifted to being swallowed by fear. I didn't know it was possible for the human body to feel this terrified. And for me, psychosis has always just been associated with sheer terror. By the time it gets to that stage, there's no high mood. It's just awful. So when a nurse asked me about my baby and my husband, I believed this was an interrogation with a life or death outcome. And I lied. I don't have a baby. This is not my husband. The room filled with people, and the psychiatrist on call arrived. Michael was told, "It looks like postnatal psychosis. It's a psychiatric emergency, but it is treatable. When he asked what he should have done if this had happened at home, the answer was call an ambulance. Now, I've yet to meet anyone else who had their first psychotic episode in a private psychiatric hospital, but I will always be grateful for the combination of luck, privilege, and most of all, a midwife who was switched on enough not to send me home. That meant that that's where I was when I had my first psychotic episode. It was diagnosed rapidly and accurately as postnatal psychosis. I had access to appropriate treatment immediately. Because I had detached from reality, I was moved to the hospital's special care unit and started on high-dose antipsychotic medication. Our week-old daughter went home with Michael. The psychosis resolved quickly with treatment, and I was well enough to go back into the mother-baby unit with our daughter within a week. We went home when my baby was about a month old, and my psychiatrist had told me from the beginning that I was at risk of a rebound depressive episode, and that for many women who experience postnatal psychosis, it can signal an underlying bipolar disorder. Having never had a history of mental illness, I discounted this possibility and believed the worst was behind me. Then 2 months into motherhood, the potential rebound depressive episode materialised. I went back into the mother-baby unit and deteriorated to the point of catatonic depression. Medication changes didn't work. Eventually, a course of electroconvulsive therapy combined with a lot of medication got me well enough to go home when my daughter was 4 months old. My psychiatrist told me I would need to be monitored for any further symptoms for 3 to 5 years to know for sure whether I had bipolar disorder. I still quietly believed that I couldn't possibly have such a severe lifelong mental illness. I recovered fully, loved my little daughter, went back to veterinary work part-time and finished the Master of Arts I'd started before my pregnancy. We moved on with life. After a lot of counselling, we decided to have a second baby. I'd been asymptomatic and gradually came off all my medication under the care of my psychiatrist. I fell pregnant quickly and I was fine until 17 weeks into the pregnancy when I was hospitalised for a depressive episode. Thankfully, I already had access to excellent mental health care in place. I chose a planned caesarean to avoid the potential sleep deprivation caused by a long labour, and I started on medication in the last 2 trimesters. I went into second-time motherhood with my eyes wide open, and still psychosis raised me to the ground 6 weeks in, and rebound depression bounced me in and out of the mother-baby unit for my son's first year. The likelihood of an underlying bipolar disorder rose. Again, I eventually re-entered my life and fully recovered. Our family was complete, and I believed that meant no more psychiatric symptoms. I lived in that bubble of denial for another 2 years. Then mania and psychosis roared in again, and my bipolar 1 diagnosis was confirmed. That was around 2013. Since then, I've had episodes every couple of years, always severe enough to require hospitalisation. My shortest admission has been 3 weeks. Sometimes it has been months. In between episodes, my quality of life is excellent. I attribute this to accurate diagnoses, rapid early intervention, access to consistent, good mental health care, developing insight into my symptoms, and knowing what treatment and management strategies work best for me. I've been involved in more formal mental health advocacy since 2014, but that advocacy started at home long before that. My family was created alongside my bipolar disorder. My children, who are now 19 and 16, grew up with a mother who lives with a severe mental illness. This has not always been easy. I spent a lot of time in the early years in hospital when they were too young to fully understand why. Because of this, I've always been open with them about my bipolar disorder and all mental illness in an age-appropriate manner, both because any concealment would make my life more complicated and because my children might carry the genetic predisposition for bipolar disorder and deserve to be informed. Outside of home, my advocacy work has included creating my own website, writing and speaking about my experiences in the media, having my memoir published, becoming a SANE peer ambassador, and recently training to become a Lifeline digital crisis supporter. While stigma is gradually lessening its grip around the more common mental illnesses such as anxiety and depression, we still have a long way to go with illnesses that feature psychosis. Looking to the future, I'll answer a question I was asked in preparation for this webinar. How would I describe high quality mental health care? To me, it means everyone who needs it having consistent, easy, free access to well-qualified, compassionate mental health care providers. It means luck and the ability to afford private health insurance having no bearing on whether someone survives their mental illness. Thanks.
Thanks for sharing an incredible story, Anita. Really appreciate your candor and honesty, and I'm sure it'll be of service to the people watching this afternoon. I'd now like to introduce you to Marg Taya, mother of Mark, who lives with bipolar disorder. Marg will be providing us with her perspective of supporting her son through life with a bipolar condition. Over to you, Marg. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to World Bipolar Day. I'd like to begin by acknowledging all of you who are living with bipolar. It isn't easy. I've stood with my son Mark through multiple acute episodes where he's had to re-establish his life over and over again. I admire that in Mark and all of the work all of you do on your own journeys. The journey with Mark and I started with, of course, with that initial first episode. It is a seminal and intensely traumatic event in all our lives, and it shouldn't be as difficult as that. The treatment, as Raoul said, is well established, and we followed that. We went off to a psychiatrist. We went off to many, but for assessment and medications to stabilize the mood. But the problem was we couldn't get into a psychiatrist. They're all booked out, 3 months waiting, and many of them, the books are closed for new starters. Next, we're off to emergency at the hospital. There's no triage by psychiatrists. You sit there like everyone else for hours and hours. And then when you finally get to see someone, they say, sorry, there's no beds available. So we've done that over and over again on this occasion and many after. For us, it was the community mental health nurses who initiated the transfer to hospital. However, it was with police involvement. It should never get to that. Perhaps what's needed is a fast track for people with complex mental health conditions to get treatment early and avert the full acute episode. We learned the golden rule the hard way: recognize mood changes early and act to prevent acute episodes. This became the major goal of our relationship. And we needed a framework around this. And the framework we followed was based on the emergency management plan. And I wanted to share that with you. The emergency management plan is developed between Mark and the doctor. It's a one-pager, and it features, Mark works out what his early warning signs and of mood change are. And what it does is it gives us a basis for Mark to monitor his mood changes. And it's a basis for us to have a discussion about that. And Raoul talked a bit about the types of early warning signs that people might have and the importance of changes in sleep patterns. That's a big one that alerts us straight away. So for Mark, that was critical importance. As an example, I might notice Mark is talking faster. I can talk about this with him. Has he noticed he's talking about it? Does he know why this might be happening? What, if anything, should we do about it? Another important tool, and the others have also mentioned this in recovery, is the establishment of routines. And that was really important to us. And one example is establishing sleep routines. And, that's important, same time, same length. And Raoul talked about that a bit with the circadian rhythm thing as well. So the routines help identify mood changes. They also gave us a feeling of control over your life and progress with the recovery. Mark was very sick when he started off and through acute episodes, had to start right from the beginning each time. But we started to get routines in place, like the most important one was taking the medicines at the same time each day. And then we build it up to going for a walk and having regular meals and so on. So the emergency management plan and routines worked for us because they gave us a factual base for discussion. It helped us not to get caught up in the symptoms of bipolar. For example, if the change in mood is anger, I didn't take it personally. I didn't see it as an attack on me. I could see it as part of the illness, and we could have a conversation about anger being an early warning sign. It calmed both of us down and enabled us to have a rational discussion. As a family, we learned early that a lot of what we were seeing in the acute episodes was what we called the illness speaking, and we could separate the illness speaking from the Mark we know and love. We love him in that rest as well, but it's harder. I'd also like to say this isn't all one-sided. Like Anita said, psychosis is incredibly frightening. I know sometimes that I'm hypervigilant. I'm scared of another episode. And Mark is too. I move quickly to panic. Relax, Mum, Mark would say to me. The best outcome now is that Mark recognises mood changes and makes adjustments. The other day he rang me up. He had a big project at work and they were filming the project. He recognised that he was speeding up and dismissed himself from the film production. And that was a tremendous, I felt so good about that he recognised it and rang me up and told me, which helped me as well. The biggest learning Mark has given me is to focus on just one single thing at a time. I've got a tendency, I don't get to speak to him that much these days, and I'll ring him up and I'll have a list a mile long and he'll say, Mum, just stick to one thing, please. So in his recovery, when we're starting off from scratch, we focused on achieving one thing each day and celebrating achieving that. Initially, it might have been just getting out of bed in the morning and having a shower and then taking a walk around the block and gradually building up to coffee with a friend. Mark and I built up to meeting in a library each day at the same time, and we were sitting side by side working on writing a book together. It was on the carer and consumer journey. We self-published it. It's not a bestseller. Most importantly, I'd say, don't let the bipolar be your lives. It can be all-consuming, but through those difficult times, it's important for each of you to do at least one thing for yourself each day and celebrate it. Before you go to bed, I'd think, oh, what have we done today? And I could think of, wow, we went to the library and I feel good. Also, do something you enjoy doing together each day and celebrate that. Life becomes dominated by the illness and it feels all bad and you need to do some good things together. I'd also like to say that I'm not Mark's only carer. You do need a community of family, friends, and colleagues who look after each other in a variety of different ways and in different areas of their lives. Ideally, Mark would also have his local community mental health and wellbeing team, including his psychiatrist, who partner with him to help him lead his best life. Actually, that's fantasy land at the moment, but we can advocate for it. Mark and I were fortunate in finding SANE early in our journey. This was incredibly important to us at the time. We were at our lowest ebbs, a bit like you, Anita, at times, I think. In fact, the CEO of SANE at the time visited Mark in the locked ward at the hospital, and sometime later, Mark won a SANE Hocking Fellowship. As for me at SANE, I found fellow travellers on the same journey as us. It helped us to see we could get through it and come out the other end. I'd found my tribe. We weren't alone. Most importantly, I'm now at the stage of uniting with others to advocate for change. So I'd like to thank SANE. It isn't easy at the complex end of the mental health spectrum, and it's good to know you're not alone with that, and that SANE is helping us to connect with others and make life a little easier for ourselves and those we love with the complex mental health conditions. It's also very good to see hundreds of people joining us on this webinar today. We're making progress with normalising conversations on bipolar and other mental health conditions. Perhaps the webinar will inspire each of you to have a conversation with people you know with a connection with bipolar. Thank you for joining with us today, and I wish you well on your own journeys.
Thank you so much for sharing the carer perspective and the importance of community and staying upbeat in what can sometimes feel like pretty bleak and isolating circumstances. We really appreciate your voice today, Marg. Finally, our last speaker for today is going to be Matt Dale, a SANE peer ambassador with more than 20 years experience working as a mental health practitioner, who will walk us through talking through his experience of recovery from bipolar disorder. Thanks, and over to you, Matt.
Yeah, thanks, Luke. And thanks to SANE Australia for giving myself and the other speakers an opportunity to speak on this really important day. World Bipolar Day actually came about 15, 16 years ago, and the day was chosen after the Dutch artist Vincent van Gogh, who a lot of experts believe had his own diagnosis of bipolar disorder. But like Anita was saying early on, everyone's journey to getting a diagnosis is quite different, but the same goes in regards to people's recovery, that it's a very unique and special experience for everyone that is working towards staying well and living well with the condition. And people can and do live well with bipolar disorder, although of course there can be days and times when people do have their challenges in trying to live and stay well with the condition. I was actually diagnosed originally, goes back 29 years ago, when I was diagnosed with bipolar type 2. And I had no idea that I was actually unwell and in the midst of a hypomanic episode when I was studying at TAFE. But for me, from once I was told that, because I got a very, unlike a lot of other people, my diagnosis was very quick. It was very obvious based on some of the symptoms that Raoul was talking about earlier on, and you can find a lot of that information on the SANE Australia website about the symptoms for bipolar disorder. There's some good fact sheets about that, but very obvious. So I was diagnosed very early with my bipolar type 2. So, but for me, it was that early acceptance of my diagnosis and my recovery. So I sort of took that on board, that this is a condition. So what could I do to stay well? What treatment would help, and what type of supports could be put in place? So though, like the physical illness, I treated it as being no different for myself, and not everyone has had that experience, of course, and it's important to respect that. For many people, in their recovery journey, is accepting that they do have a mental illness, whether it's bipolar or schizophrenia, etc. Once that acceptance, I think for people, that can help in their recovery journey of moving forward, because that it's a big step in accepting being diagnosed with a mental illness due to the stigma that still surrounds the low prevalence mental illnesses such as bipolar or schizophrenia. So I suppose part of that early acceptance is also linked to what Anita talked about earlier on too, like with self-stigma or stigma that still especially surrounds illnesses such as bipolar. There's a lot of myths and misunderstandings still, although it's a lot better than it was 30 years ago. But that's why days like today, to try and debunk some of the myths and misunderstandings, is really important. And again, like you'll find a lot of information on the SANE Australia website about debunking some of those myths. There's fact sheets and other information there that's really good. But for me, I never really, from what I can see, really experienced self-stigma. A lot of people do and feel that shame of being diagnosed with a mental illness. I saw it as reminding myself that my bipolar diagnosis is a part of who I am, but that it doesn't define me, as I have many things that make up who I am as an individual person, like family, hobbies, interests, personal strengths, work-related things, and a lot more. But like I said, but at the same time acknowledging that the illness can present challenges or problems, but that I could live well with this condition with the right treatment, support, and help. Something that was really important, I think Anita touched on that, or even Marg actually, talking about her son Mark, that I think with other conditions for people too, learning over time as you begin to live with the condition, that the understanding of my own, and again respecting that everyone's different in regards to the bipolar. What early warning signs I have might be quite different for Marg's son or Anita, or triggers, or stresses that may lead to becoming unwell. And that if I noticed that I was becoming unwell due to these early warning signs for me, that I would seek out the necessary help or treatment from my psychiatrist, who I'm quite lucky to have had the same one for 20 years. They haven't retired, and they know me very well. And also relinking in with my psychologist, because cognitive-based therapy, and in conjunction with medication or being linked in with a psychiatrist, can work really well in people's recovery, but it's not the be-all and end-all. The other, in regards to staying well and living well with bipolar, again, Dr. Rowe talked about that, the importance of doing other things to stay well outside of just medication, because it's not just all about medication and psychology or counselling. It's doing things like that all of us should do anyway in everyday life if we can, but I should do more of it. But exercise, but getting a good night's sleep hygiene is very important when it comes to bipolar, in living well with the condition. So getting a good night's sleep is very important, and staying well with my bipolar. Even things like a good diet and having social networks. So having good friends and being, rather than, it can be difficult at times, especially if a person's in a depressive state of illness where they don't want to, not motivated to get out or do things, that sort of thing. But having good friends that can stay in touch with them, or try to get out with their friends and that sort of thing. Another really important thing, especially in the early part of working towards my recovery, was I think, educating myself about the illness condition. And it's just like, if, for example, if I had diabetes and was insulin dependent, wanting to find out like how important that was, like with the daily injections and with my blood sugar levels, something like that. If you had a diagnosis of diabetes, the same, I've treated, okay, I've got this condition called bipolar disorder. What can I do to stay well? So from originally, because I suppose when I was diagnosed in 1997, the internet was just coming in. So reading books on the condition, not overdoing it, just getting enough information to understand the condition, because you don't want it to absorb your life, but enough to understand enough about the condition. And also some really good internet websites, because we can play Dr. Google and go to some websites aren't good, but to go to good websites such as SANE Australia or Black Dog is very good in regards to bipolar disorder. But also talking to health professionals such as a psychiatrist and getting good quality information, or psychologists, and also talking to other people who have bipolar disorder. Learning for them, like support groups or forums, are a very good way, just like the SANE forums, for getting information, that sort of thing. The other last thing I probably wanted to point out was about living my life instead of sort of being stuck in that illness, sickness mode, where people can sort of end up developing a sense of hopelessness. And that's easy said than done, because there are times when it's very difficult to live with the illness. It is a day-to-day thing, just like some physical illnesses that people have. You do have to work at the condition and monitor you, like I said, about your early warning signs and triggers. So it's about, and especially people around you. I think Marg was talking about like having a wellness plan, especially when your loved one, partner or child, when they're well, to develop a wellness plan can be very helpful for people about the things they would put in place when someone's starting to become unwell. And trying to, again, it's not always simple, but continue to be positive and try to focus on living a fulfilling life, and like focusing on my goals and dreams and aspirations. Things I knew once I was diagnosed that things wouldn't be quite the same, but just trying to still, especially when you're well, to try and still do your hobbies and interests and things that are important for you. And again, respecting that everyone's different and what's important to them, and the recovery journey. But everyone's journey is quite different. But it's the supports around them that can make a difference as well. Especially family, friends, as well as their treatment team. And I think establishing a really good treatment team that could be, it doesn't mean necessarily that a person has to see their psychiatrist or psychologist all the time, just when they feel that they might be becoming a bit unwell, to link back in with those supports is really important as well. So that's, I suppose, the key messages I wanted to share today, Luke. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks so much for sharing that, and sort of some practical lived experience and sort of how you've navigated. And I've got no doubt that some of that information's helpful for some of our audience today as well. And so I'll just give a quick heads up to our panelists that we'll get you to unmute in a second, because we've had some brilliant questions come through, and as suspected, there's far more than we can answer live in the panel, and appreciate the work you've been doing on the keyboard, Rahul, typing up some thoughtful answers to the Q&A. But we have had our team go through and sort of try and gather the questions that we think are going to be the most utility for the audience today. And so I might throw it to you first, Marg. And this is a question that came from the audience. How can you encourage someone to see a health professional or maintain a treatment regime if they don't want to do so?
Wow. Just an easy one to start with.
Just to warm you up. Yeah.
It's not that easy, as we all know. Yeah. Well, I think it's working together, and like if someone doesn't want to do exercise, it's hard to get them to do it. But if they've got some motivation for it, then they will do it, or they're more likely to do it. So I think it's figuring out what might motivate them to do it, and what sort of exercise might be that they might enjoy. And I think that's really helpful. My son actually has put on quite a lot of weight with the medication, but he's getting married on the 8th of the 8th. So he's really highly motivated to get, fit and healthy. So he's on his way to doing that. So maybe this person will have some good motivation like that will get them going on the exercise plan.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. It is possible. When I originally started my medication, I was on olanzapine and developed a big appetite and a big hunger, and then over time was able to go off it and work it back off. But yeah, that's a great share, and thanks for contributing. Maybe a question for you, Matt, that we've had come through. How do people overcome some of the discrimination that results following a bipolar disorder a diagnosis? For example, difficulty obtaining insurances or perhaps something related to work.
Yeah, thanks for that, Luke. Because I actually was involved with people that's available to the general public. There was a report done by SANE Australia as well, but I had my own. I was with my superannuation was trying to increase my life insurance cover on that. So I have experienced discrimination. That's the only time I've actually felt discriminated against in regards to my bipolar disorder, where I actually even discriminated against myself because I'd worked in general insurance in the past, but said, I don't mind if you actually don't cover me for the bipolar disorder, as long as you cover me for physical health, like if I have a car accident or heart attack, that sort of thing. But it was interesting, the attitude of the GP from the insurance company said, well, what's to say, you didn't line the car up and deliberately, crash the car into the tree and take your own life, that sort of thing. Or he also talked about the evidence supporting that people with mental illness have a higher rate of heart disease, which is possibly true because of people with having probably higher levels of physical illness. So there was that levels of discrimination. But if you're going through the Equal Opportunity Commission in Victoria here, it took about 12 months, but I persisted, and we got an outcome in the end where the insurance, they did end up providing that higher level of cover, but they did put an exclusion on the policy that I wouldn't be covered for mental illness. But I think over the years that exclusion has been dropped off. Things are getting better in regards to not only like life insurance, but travel insurance as well, where because I used to work in travel myself, where travel insurance, not all companies, but some are, you have to look at the fine print, where some companies are looking to cover that. But discrimination still is, I think it's the report that SANE did, the National Stigma Report Card, it's called, for anyone that's interested. So National Stigma Report Card, that looks at a whole range of different areas and people like work or health and that sort of thing, where people have been discriminated against. It's better than it used to be, I think, but it still does happen in society due to a lack of understanding about these low prevalence mental illnesses such as schizophrenia and bipolar. And again, that's why it's so important for us to have these education sessions to break down some of that stigma and make sure that's fair and equitable for everyone, just like other disabilities in the community.
Thanks, Matt. And I had an example of reverse discrimination where I chose not to disclose my history while I was going for a particular job. Then they kept quizzing me on it. And I said, well, I had a health episode. And they said, well, we wanted that information because it shows you're resilient and that they're the kind of people that we want to hire. Thanks for the contribution there. The next question, I think I'll throw to Anita, and then if anyone else wants to add, please do. there are a number of non-traditional and complementary treatments that are being used for bipolar disorder, such as cannabis. What's the opinions of the panel on this?
It's a difficult one because I think that there is no perfect treatment or medication out there, whether that's a pharmacological medication or whether you are looking at non-traditional treatments. I suppose I can really only speak from my own lived experience, which has been with very traditional medications for bipolar. I've been pretty fortunate. I've been on a lot of those medications for over 20 years now, and I've managed so far, touch wood, to not have any significant side effects, or I haven't come across a situation where I've had to weigh up staying on a medication because the side effects were too severe. Actually, I have had that once, but that's not very often in 20 years. I think the thing with complementary medicines is that they often don't have the data and the randomized trials, scientific trials that can give hard evidence. So you're very much looking at anecdotal evidence. So you might hear from someone who has used the cannabis or another non-traditional treatment and everything went really well. You're not really going to know whether that was the cannabis or whether that was just an incidental finding. I haven't used any complementary medications other than a bit of lavender oil here and there, but that's not that hasn't really done much for my symptoms. Yeah. That's just because I like it. So I think it's a very individual thing, and I think if if you've got a practitioner that you trust and that you're happy with, and you are fully informed of the potential side effects and potential benefits, then you have to weigh those and decide whether to make a decision. Don't know if that was much help.
No, thank you, Anita. And I'll add, in my younger years, I definitely embraced a lot of non-traditional treatments and was definitely self-medicating, I would say. And I think for me, dealing with those reasons for self-medication and perhaps the hurts inside through more sustained healing practice was really helpful for me. And so I can understand each their own and people's why people might feel drawn to alternative treatments, but the sort of information I got while I was navigating this process and sort of stuck with me is that everything else is higher risk because sleep and routine are so important. So we'll keep moving on, and I've got room for perhaps one more question. How can we advocate for admission or treatment before getting to the point of harm to self or others when there is no insight in mania and psychosis? Anyone like to take this?
I think. Yeah. Oh, sorry.
No, please, Anita.
Yeah. I think with insight, I don't believe anybody has insight into their first episode. Well, I certainly didn't, because what you just interpret what you're experiencing as the reality. And that makes it very difficult. And then with each subsequent episode, it certainly took a while, but the insights started to come earlier and earlier and earlier. And I also really got to a point of viewing a hospital admission as just something else in my toolkit to manage this illness. Whereas in the beginning, it was very much, whatever you do, don't end up in hospital. You don't want to go to hospital because that means it's really bad. And so I'd hold off and then end up becoming much sicker and then end up having to spend much longer in hospital. Whereas these days, for me, I have 3 prodromal or early signs, and I lose short-term memory, I lose concentration, and I come down with a pathological irritability. And once those come, that can be before a manic episode, a psychotic episode, or depressive. But once those arrive, I don't muck around, and then I head straight into hospital. So I think insight you hopefully try and gain with each episode. I don't know if anyone else has thoughts on that.
Anyone else like some closing thoughts, and then we'll do the wrap up.
Yeah, just
go, Ro.
Go on, Matt.
No, I was just going to add something to the first question, actually, Luke, because I've supported people in mental health jobs, encouraging someone to see a health professional, because it's very hard, I think, even then, sort of explaining to someone like a loved one that I'm worried about you and where you're at with your health in general, and just pointing out examples. Even then, depends on how unwell someone is, but saying you're normally like this, how you present and your behaviour and whatever, but what symptoms when they're unwell, a person's becoming unwell, that they're presenting with certain particular symptoms that are in line with whether it's bipolar or whatever condition. But also just, being there and showing that love and encouragement for them, that you are first and foremost concerned, and maybe just getting some good information. Sometimes people might actually leave information sitting around the house too, that the person might actually realise that they might need that help.
Okay, thank you, Matt. Rahul, closing thought?
Yeah, just a couple of quick ones. One is just please do jump on our forums and ask some of the questions that we haven't been able to get to. I'll certainly try and do a big bulk response within a week or so. The other point was around the prior question around complementary kind of approaches. I think in addition to the great points by Anita, it's worth noting that some of these approaches, when they get a bit of critical mass of interest, there generally is a trial done. I'm in my other hat conducting one around lavender extract for PTSD at the moment, Sarlexin, the STOP trial. But it is, and so sometimes these recommendations can shift. There was some enthusiasm for cannabis for a while in the field, but most of those studies have ended up being quite disappointing. So, I think it's worth just seeing people who might have an expertise in that area and exploring kind of what the most recent kind of science has to say about some of these factors. On the advocacy piece, yeah, it is a tricky one. I'm probably with Anita that most people, don't have that insight. The other thing that can be helpful, though, for subsequent things is documenting a bit of an advanced care plan and directive. And, most jurisdictions have some legislation to support the consideration of those in treatment for services. So that can also help.
Excellent. Thank you, Rahul. And I'm afraid we've run out of time. I'd like to say a huge thank you to all our speakers today, Rahul, Marg, Matt, Anita. It's very much appreciated. And judging by all the emoji reactions from the webinar, I think our audience appreciated them too. I'd also like to say a final thank you to the Colindina 5 Foundation for their support. And if any of these discussions, we have discussed some heavy stuff today, have caused you distress, I do strongly encourage you to seek support and connection and exercise a bit of self-care. And a reminder that for crisis support, please contact Lifeline at any time on 131114. And SANE has recently launched a new recovery and psychosocial program called Recovery Club. It's completely free and accessible via any internet-enabled device, and suitable for both individuals with their own lived experience of bipolar disorder, but also to carers, family, and friends who need a bit of extra support. And the SANE forums offer a warm and inclusive space for peer-to-peer discussions. So if you'd like to continue the conversation, we've set up a special thread for people who have attended this webinar, and you can access both these services, the SANE forums and Recovery Club, by visiting the SANE website at sane.org. Thank you for your interest, and we hope to connect with you again on another webinar soon.